The bankrupt millionaire let the young homeless boy spend the night in his restaurant. At dawn, the man froze when he saw what the boy had done to the place. The night sky blazed orange as flames engulfed Jonathan's restaurant. Mason, a 14-year-old boy with determined eyes, crawled through the smoke-filled kitchen, desperately searching for Jonathan's mother's recipe book. The leather-bound volume contained more than just culinary secrets. It held the last connection to a legacy that was now literally going up in flames. Mason. "Get out of there!" Christian's voice broke through the crackling fire, but Mason pressed on. He could see the book on the top shelf, exactly where Jonathan always kept it. The heat was becoming unbearable, and the smoke burned his lungs, but he wouldn't leave without it. This book meant everything to Jonathan. Through the dense smoke, Mason caught glimpses of dark figures moving outside Logan's men. He was sure of it. They had started this fire, thinking the restaurant would be empty at this hour. They hadn't counted on Mason staying late to practice his cooking. With trembling hands, Mason finally grasped the book. As he turned to escape, a burning beam crashed down behind him, blocking his original path. The flames were closing in, and the air was getting thinner. His vision began to blur, but he clutched the book tightly to his chest. Over here, Lauren's voice cut through his panic. She had found another way in through the back door, risking her own life to save him. Mason stumbled toward her voice, keeping low to the ground where the air was clearer. Just as they made it outside, a massive explosion rocked the building, sending them sprawling onto the pavement. The recipe book flew from Mason's hands, landing open on the wet ground. As sirens wailed in the distance, Mason watched in horror as fire trucks pulled up, their red lights illuminating the devastation. Jonathan arrived moments later, his face pale with shock. But when he saw Mason safe, clutching the saved recipe book, tears welled in his eyes. "You could have died," he whispered, pulling Mason into a tight embrace. "I couldn't let them destroy her memory," Mason replied, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "Your mother's recipes, they're our heart." In the distance, a familiar black car pulled away silently into the night. The war for Jonathan's legacy had just begun, and this was only the first battle. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support enables us to continue creating meaningful content that celebrates the triumph of the human spirit. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories coming soon. Jonathan's story began 25 years ago, when his mother Sarah opened the Heritage Kitchen with nothing but determination and her collection of family recipes. The small restaurant, nestled in the heart of downtown, became known not just for its food, but for the warmth that Sarah brought to every dish she served. She was a single mother who had raised Jonathan alone after his father's death, pouring all her love into both her son and her cooking. Sarah had a special way of turning simple ingredients into extraordinary dishes, but what truly set her apart was how she used food to heal broken spirits. She would often say, "A meal made with love can mend a broken heart." The restaurant became a sanctuary for those who needed more than just a meal. It was a place where lonely souls found comfort and troubled hearts found peace. Jonathan grew up in the kitchen, learning every recipe by heart, not just the ingredients, but the stories behind them. Each dish carried a memory: the chicken soup his mother made when he had his first heartbreak, the apple pie that celebrated his college acceptance, the special pasta she created the day they almost lost the restaurant during the financial crisis, but somehow pulled through. However, their story took a dark turn when Sarah was diagnosed with terminal cancer. In her final months, she made Jonathan promise two things: to keep the restaurant alive and to use it to help others as she had. Her last gift to him was a leather-bound recipe book, containing not just their family recipes, but also her personal notes, memories, and secrets about how to touch people's hearts through food. After Sarah's death, whispers began circulating in the community. Logan, once Jonathan's closest friend and a regular at the restaurant, started spreading rumors that Jonathan had mismanaged his mother's money, suggesting he was somehow responsible for the stress that might have worsened her condition. These accusations cut deep, not just because they were false, but because they came from someone who had shared countless meals at their family table. The reality was far different. Sarah had left Jonathan not just a restaurant, but a significant debt she had taken on to help Logan start his own business years ago, a truth he kept hidden out of respect for his mother's memory. Logan had never repaid the loan, and now he was using his growing influence in the city to slowly destroy what Sarah had built. Despite the challenges, Jonathan held on to his mother's philosophy. He continued her tradition of keeping the restaurant open late on cold nights for those who had nowhere else to go, even when it meant operating at a loss. He maintained her practice of having a pay-what-you-can policy on Sunday evenings, ensuring that no one in their community would go hungry, just as she had always intended. The recipe book became his most treasured possession, not just for the culinary secrets it contained, but for the handwritten notes in the margins, little pieces of his mother's wisdom that guided him through his darkest days. Remember, Jonathan one note read, "The secret ingredient in every dish is the love you put into it. Never let anyone take that away from you." Now, as he faced mounting pressures and declining business due to Logan's subtle campaign against him, Jonathan found himself at a crossroads. The bank was threatening to foreclose, suppliers were pulling out due to unpaid bills, and his mother's legacy was slipping through his fingers. Yet every time he opened that recipe book, he could hear her voice, urging him to keep fighting, to remember that their restaurant was more than just a business. It was a home for the heartbroken, a refuge for the lost, and a testament to the power of love served on a plate. Mason's life before finding the Heritage Kitchen was a series of cruel twists and abandoned hopes. At 12 years old, he had already experienced more hardship than most adults, bouncing between foster homes where he was treated as nothing more than a monthly check. His last foster family had been the worst, using him for labor while keeping him hungry and isolated. One particularly cold night, after another beating for a minor mistake, Mason gathered his few belongings and ran away. For 6 months, he survived on the streets, sleeping in alleyways and scrounging for food in restaurant dumpsters. It was during one of these desperate searches that fate led him to the back of the Heritage Kitchen. Unlike other restaurants that locked their dumpsters or doused leftover food with bleach, he found clean, wrapped portions of food carefully placed where homeless people could find them. At night, as Mason huddled in the alley eating the still warm soup he'd found, Jonathan caught him. But instead of chasing him away, Jonathan did something that would change Mason's life forever. He invited him inside. "The food tastes better at a proper table," he had said, his eyes kind but filled with a sadness that Mason would later understand. What started as one meal turned into a nightly routine. Mason would arrive just before closing, and Jonathan would teach him to clean up in exchange for dinner. Through these evening lessons, Jonathan began to notice something special in the way Mason watched him cook, how the boy's eyes lit up at the sizzle of garlic and oil, how his hands naturally found the right rhythm for kneading dough. But Mason's past wasn't done with him. His former foster family had reported him missing only to keep receiving payments, and when they tracked him to the restaurant, they tried to forcibly take him back. It was Jonathan who stood between them and Mason, threatening to expose their abuse and fighting through legal channels to become Mason's temporary guardian. The truth about Mason's origins remained a mystery until Jonathan found a crumpled photo in the boy's few possessions, a picture of a man in military uniform who looked remarkably like Mason. The name on the uniform read Thomas Reynolds, and something about it struck a chord in Jonathan's memory. Tom Reynolds had been his best friend in college, who died saving Jonathan's life during a camping accident. The dates, the resemblance, it all fit. Mason was Tom's son, though the boy had never known his real father. This discovery created an even deeper bond between them. Jonathan saw in Mason not just a child in need, but the son of the man who had given his life for him. He kept this knowledge to himself, waiting for the right moment to tell Mason the truth about his heritage, about the hero his father had been. In the kitchen, Mason found more than just shelter. He found purpose. His natural talent for cooking, combined with an almost desperate desire to learn, made him a quick study. Each successfully mastered recipe became a small victory. each compliment from a customer a reason to keep going. The kitchen became his sanctuary, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables his meditation, the art of creating beautiful food his way of proving he was worth more than his past suggested. But deep inside, Mason carried wounds that weren't so easily healed. He flinched at sudden movements, hoarded food in his room, and woke from nightmares he wouldn't discuss. His trust issues ran deep, making it hard for him to believe that this new life wouldn't be snatched away like everything else good in his past. Only in the kitchen, with his hands busy and Jonathan's patient guidance, did these fears begin to fade, replaced by a growing confidence and sense of belonging he'd never known before. The complex web of relationships surrounding the Heritage Kitchen centered on Christian, Lauren, and Logan, each carrying their own hidden connections to Jonathan's story. Christian, the restaurant's head waiter, had first arrived 5 years ago, carrying his own burden of loss. A former martial arts instructor, he had lost his family in a suspicious house fire that destroyed not just his home but his entire martial arts school. Though never proven, he suspected Logan's involvement, as the fire occurred shortly after he refused to sell his property to Logan's development company. Lauren appeared in their lives as a health inspector, her professional demeanor masking a deep personal interest in the restaurant. Unknown to everyone, including herself, she was Jonathan's long-lost sister, separated during their parents' messy divorce when she was just an infant. Their mother Sarah had searched for her daughter for years, leaving cryptic clues in her recipe book that only Lauren would understand, measurements that matched her birthday, notes that referenced their shared childhood lullaby. Logan, once Jonathan's closest friend, had transformed from a struggling businessman into a ruthless real estate mogul. His success was built on a foundation of betrayal, the loan from Sarah that he never repaid, the properties he acquired through intimidation, and the lives he ruined in his pursuit of power. But his vendetta against the Heritage Kitchen went deeper than mere business. He blamed Sarah for choosing to help others instead of investing in his ventures, a bitterness that grew toxic after her death. The dynamics between these characters grew more complicated as their paths increasingly intertwined. Christian found himself drawn to Lauren, their shared sense of justice and growing suspicion of Logan creating an unspoken bond. Yet he held back, feeling unworthy of love until he could prove himself more than just a waiter with a troubled past. Lauren, meanwhile, felt an inexplicable connection to the restaurant and its people, especially Jonathan, though she couldn't explain why his mother's handwriting in the recipe book seemed so hauntingly familiar. Logan watched their growing closeness with calculating eyes, seeing potential weaknesses to exploit. He had already planted one of his associates as a regular customer, gathering information and looking for opportunities to cause trouble. But his plans were complicated by his own history, with the place memories of years spent at that counter, of Sarah's kindness when he had nothing, of the friendship with Jonathan he had thrown away for ambition. The restaurant's small staff became a tight-knit family, bound together by their shared love for the place and its mission. Even the regular customers played their parts in this intricate drama. The elderly couple, who had been coming since Sarah's time and knew all the old stories, the homeless veteran whom Jonathan always fed, the local kids who did their homework at the corner table while waiting for their parents to finish work. As health inspector, Lauren found herself caught between her growing attachment to the restaurant and her professional duties. She saw how Jonathan bent rules to help others, keeping the kitchen open after hours to feed the homeless, allowing Mason to work despite his age, storing extra food for emergency donations. Her reports became increasingly creative in protecting these technical violations while maintaining the spirit of the law. Christian's protective instincts grew stronger as he witnessed the subtle ways Logan tried to undermine the restaurant. His martial arts training made him especially alert to suspicious customers and potential threats. He began teaching Mason basic self-defense moves during quiet afternoons, knowing the boy's past made him vulnerable but also resilient. These relationships would be tested as Logan's attacks grew bolder, forcing each character to choose between self-preservation and loyalty, between running from the past and standing to fight for their shared future. The Heritage Kitchen had become more than just a restaurant. It was the intersection of their stories, a battleground for redemption, and possibly the key to healing wounds they didn't even know they carried. The accusations against Jonathan erupted like a wildfire on a quiet Sunday evening. Logan had orchestrated his plan perfectly, choosing the restaurant's busiest night to unleash his carefully crafted destruction. As families gathered for their traditional Sunday dinners, an elderly woman, one of Logan's paid actors, stood up dramatically in the middle of the dining room, pointing a shaking finger at Jonathan. "That's him. The man who drove his mother to her death," her voice cracked with well-rehearsed emotion. "Sarah trusted you with everything, and you gambled it all away." The restaurant fell silent, forks frozen midway to mouths, all eyes turning to Jonathan, who stood paralyzed behind the counter. Before Jonathan could respond, another patron, another of Logan's plants, joined in. "I remember seeing him arguing with Sarah just days before she died. She was crying, begging him to stop taking money from the restaurant." The whispers began, spreading through the dining room like poison. Mason, who had been serving a family their dessert, dropped his tray with a crash that echoed through the stunned silence. He rushed to Jonathan's defense, but his youth and obvious attachment to Jonathan only seemed to fuel the growing suspicions. "He would never hurt Sarah. You don't know him like I do." Christian watched the scene unfold with growing anger, recognizing the orchestrated nature of the attack. He'd seen similar tactics in the days before his own business was destroyed. But when he tried to intervene, pointing out the suspicious timing of these accusations, Logan himself appeared at the door, playing the role of concerned citizen perfectly. "I've held my tongue for years out of respect for our old friendship," Jonathan, Logan announced, his voice carrying just the right note of reluctant duty. "But the truth needs to come out. I have documents showing irregular withdrawals from the restaurant's accounts during Sarah's final months, money that could have paid for better treatment." Lauren, who was dining there that evening in her personal capacity, felt her investigator's instincts kick in. She noticed how the initial accusers seemed to know exactly when to speak, how their words appeared rehearsed rather than spontaneous. But she also saw the damage being done. Regular customers were already gathering their things, leaving half-eaten meals and decades of loyalty behind. Jonathan finally found his voice, but it came out weak, strained by the weight of these false accusations. "My mother," he started, but the words caught in his throat. How could he defend himself without revealing Sarah's secret generosity, the loans she had given to help others, including the massive sum Logan had never repaid? The evening descended into chaos. More planted witnesses emerged with fabricated stories, each one driving another nail into the coffin of Jonathan's reputation. Old customers, people who had celebrated birthdays and anniversaries at these very tables, now looked at him with doubt and disappointment. As the restaurant emptied, Mason found Jonathan's mother's recipe book and opened it to a random page, where Sarah's handwriting spoke of her pride in her son. "Jonathan adds love to every dish, just as I taught him," the note read. But now those words, once a source of comfort, seemed to mock their current reality. The local news vans arrived within the hour, anonymously tipped off, of course their cameras capturing the exodus of disgusted customers. Logan gave a masterful performance for the reporters, playing the role of the reluctant whistleblower, the old friend forced by conscience to speak out. By midnight, the damage was done. The restaurant stood empty, save for Jonathan's loyal family, Christian, Mason, and Lauren, who remained behind, stunned by the speed and efficiency of the destruction. Social media was already buzzing with the scandal, longtime customers posting about their shock and disappointment. Jonathan sat at his mother's favorite table, her recipe book open before him, tears falling silently onto the yellowed pages. Everything she had built, everything she had entrusted to him, was crumbling. Mason placed a hand on his shoulder, while Christian and Lauren exchanged determined looks. They knew this was only the beginning of Logan's campaign to destroy not just the restaurant, but the very memory of Sarah's legacy. Outside, Logan watched through the window, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. Phase 1 had gone perfectly. Soon, he thought, Jonathan would have no choice but to sell, and the truth about Sarah's generosity and Logan's debt to her would remain buried forever. What he didn't see was Lauren quietly photographing the suspicious gathering of his paid actors behind the restaurant, or the way Christian's trained eyes had already identified several of them from his own past encounters with Logan's tactics. Logan's first attempt to take over the restaurant came wrapped in a facade of kindness. He arrived early one morning before opening, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, carrying a briefcase filled with documents. Jonathan was in the kitchen preparing the day's first batch of bread, his mother's recipe filling the air with a comforting aroma that made Logan's artificial smile waver for just a moment. "I'm here to help you," old friend Logan announced, spreading papers across the counter where Sarah used to serve their morning coffee. "The restaurant's reputation is in tatters, but I can save your mother's legacy. All you have to do is sign over controlling interest to my restaurant group. You'll still be the face of the place, still be in charge of the kitchen." Jonathan's hands were dusted with flour as he examined the contracts, his eyes catching on phrases like complete operational control and right of first refusal on sale behind Logan. Mason had frozen in the doorway, a box of fresh vegetables in his arms, listening intently. The boy's eyes narrowed with suspicion, recognizing the predatory gleam in Logan's expression. "We could restore your mother's vision," Logan continued smoothly. "Renovate, expand, maybe even open multiple locations. Sarah always dreamed big, didn't she?" He deliberately used her name, watching how it made Jonathan flinch. "Think of what she would want her recipes reaching more people, her philosophy of hospitality spreading across the city." Christian arrived for his shift just then, immediately sensing the tension. He positioned himself near Mason, both of them watching the exchange with growing concern. Lauren, who had stopped by for her routine inspection, lingered in the dining room, pretending to examine health certificates while straining to hear the conversation. "The timing's perfect," Logan pressed. "Before the health department starts asking too many questions about certain irregularities in your operations." His eyes flicked meaningfully toward Mason, who technically wasn't old enough to work in the kitchen. "Before the bank looks too closely at those late mortgage payments." Jonathan's hands clenched, leaving flour prints on the contracts. "You know why those payments are late, Logan. The money my mother loaned you." Logan cut him off sharply. "Ancient history, unprovable allegations. What matters is the future, Jonathan. Your mother's legacy deserves better than this slow decline into irrelevance." Lauren, unable to maintain her pretense of inspection, moved closer. She caught fragments of their history and their words, hints of betrayal, of broken trust, of debts unpaid. Her investigator's instincts told her there was much more to this story than a simple business proposition. Mason, still holding the vegetables, suddenly spoke up. "Mrs. Sarah wouldn't want this place turned into some soulless chain restaurant. She used to say the heart of cooking is making people feel loved, not making money." Logan's smile turned cold, touching sentiment from a street urchin. "But business is business, and sentiment doesn't pay bills," he turned back to Jonathan. "You have until the end of the week to decide. After that, well." He left the threat hanging as he gathered his papers. As Logan headed for the door, he paused beside Christian. "You should consider your position too. When ownership changes, we'll need properly trained staff, not charity cases with questionable pasts." The threat was clear. Christian's job, like everything else, hung in the balance. After Logan left, the four of them gathered around the counter, looking at the business card he'd left behind. His company's logo seemed to mock them, a stylized fork and knife arranged in a dollar sign. Jonathan picked up his mother's recipe book, running his fingers over the worn cover. "He's right about one thing," Jonathan said quietly. "The restaurant's struggling. These accusations about Mom's death, they're keeping customers away. Maybe. No, Christian interrupted firmly. Sarah gave me a chance when no one else would. This place is more than just a business. It's a home for people who need one. Lauren nodded, adding, there are irregularities in his proposal. Give me time to investigate. Something's not right about his sudden interest in a restaurant he spent years trying to undermine. Mason clutched the vegetable box tighter. We can't let him win. Mrs. Sarah's recipes, they're not just instructions for food. They're instructions for living, for caring about people. He'd destroy all that. Jonathan looked at their determined faces, his makeshift family, each brought to him by his mother's legacy of kindness. He knew Logan would return with more pressure, more threats, more attempts to force his hand. But watching Mason begin to unpack the vegetables, seeing Christian straighten the tables with precise care, noting Lauren's concern but determined expression, he felt his resolve strengthen. His mother had built this place on love and trust. Logan might have forgotten those values, but Jonathan never would. Mason's discovery of the truth about Jonathan's past came on a stormy night while cleaning the restaurant's basement storage. Among dusty boxes and old receipts, he found a newspaper clipping from 15 years ago. The headline read, "Local hero dies, saving friend in mountain accident." The photo showed a younger Jonathan next to a man in military uniform, a man who looked strikingly like Mason himself. His hands trembling, Mason read the article. Thomas Reynolds, decorated veteran and Jonathan's college roommate, had died saving Jonathan during a climbing accident. The date matched what little Mason knew about his father's death. The resemblance in the photo was undeniable, but it was the handwritten note in Sarah's familiar script on the margin that made his heart stop watch over Thomas's son, if we ever find him. Upstairs, Jonathan was closing the restaurant, unaware of Mason's discovery. The boy sat in the dim basement light, pieces of his past finally falling into place. The way Jonathan sometimes looked at him with a mixture of pride and guilt, the extra attention, the fierce protectiveness, it all made sense now. Christian found him there, clutching the yellowed paper. Having known the truth for months but sworn to secrecy by Jonathan, he sat quietly beside Mason. "He's been trying to find the right way to tell you," Christian explained softly. The guilt of surviving, of not being able to save your father, it weighs on him every day. Mason's mind raced through memories, Jonathan teaching him to make his father's favorite dish without explaining why, the military-style discipline he occasionally displayed, the dog tags he kept in his office drawer. "Why didn't he tell me?" Mason whispered, his voice caught between anger and hurt. "Because he promised your father he would protect you." Lauren's voice came from the stairs. She too had been carrying this secret, having uncovered it during her investigation into Logan's activities. But Logan found out somehow, and he's been using this knowledge to manipulate Jonathan. The truth unfolded like chapters in Sarah's recipe book. Thomas Reynolds had made Jonathan promise to find his infant son if anything happened to him, knowing his wife was ill and his own dangerous military career. After the accident, Jonathan searched for years, but Mason had already disappeared into the foster care system under a different name. Upstairs, they heard Jonathan calling for them, his footsteps approaching the basement door. Mason quickly wiped his eyes but kept the newspaper clipping clutched in his hand. When Jonathan appeared at the top of the stairs, the look on Mason's face told him everything. "I was going to tell you," Jonathan started, his voice breaking. "I've been trying to find the right moment, the right words." He descended the stairs slowly, each step heavy with the weight of his long-kept secret. Mason stood, holding out the article. "My father. He saved your life, it wasn't a question. And you've been trying to save mine ever since." The realization brought fresh tears to his eyes. Jonathan reached the bottom step and stopped, uncertain. "Thomas was the bravest man I knew. When I found you at our back door that night, looking so much like him, I knew it was my chance to keep my promise to both him and your father." The basement's dim light cast long shadows as Mason crossed the space between them. For a moment he stood before Jonathan, studying his face as if seeing it for the first time. Then, without warning, he threw his arms around the man who had become so much more than just his rescuer. "You could have told me," Mason whispered into Jonathan's shoulder. "I've been wondering my whole life who I really am." Jonathan held him tightly, years of guilt and love pouring out. "You're Thomas Reynolds' son, you're Sarah's grandson in all but blood, and you're my family, Mason. Nothing will ever change that." Lauren and Christian watched the scene unfold, understanding that this revelation would change everything. Logan's hold over Jonathan had weakened the secret he'd been using as leverage was now in the open. But they also knew this knowledge made Mason an even bigger target. As if reading their thoughts, Jonathan pulled back to look Mason in the eyes. "Logan knows about your father. He's been threatening to reveal it, claiming it would ruin the restaurant's reputation, taking in the son of the man whose death I caused." Mason's jaw set in a determined line, so like his father's. "Let him try. I'm not ashamed of who I am. And you didn't cause anything. My father was a hero, and so are you." The truth had finally broken free, like the sunrise after a long night, but as they made their way back upstairs, they knew Logan wouldn't give up easily. If anything, this revelation would make him more dangerous, more desperate to destroy the bonds that made the Heritage Kitchen more than just a restaurant. The diagnosis came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Jonathan had been ignoring the symptoms for months: the persistent cough, the growing fatigue, the unexplained weight loss. He'd attributed it all to stress from Logan's constant attacks on the restaurant. But when he collapsed in the kitchen while teaching Mason a new recipe, there was no more denying that something was seriously wrong. The hospital waiting room was sterile and cold, a stark contrast to the warm kitchen he'd left behind. Mason sat beside him, still wearing his cooking apron, flour dusting his sleeves. Christian paced nervously while Lauren held Jonathan's hand, her usual professional demeanor cracking under the weight of concern. When the doctor finally called them in, his grave expression said everything before he even spoke. "The tests show an aggressive form of lung cancer, Mr. Walker. It's already quite advanced." The words fell like heavy stones in the quiet room. "Without immediate treatment, we're looking at months, not years." Jonathan's first thought wasn't for himself, but for the promise he'd made to his mother. "The restaurant," he whispered. "I can't leave now." "Not with everything that's happening." Mason's hand tightened on his arm, the boy's face pale with fear. The doctor continued, explaining treatment options, success rates, and costs, astronomical figures that made Jonathan's heart sink further. The restaurant's insurance wouldn't cover most of it, and with their current financial struggles, the choice seemed impossible: fight for his life or fight for his mother's legacy. "There are clinical trials," the doctor offered, noting Jonathan's expression. "But they're experimental, and there's no guarantee." His voice faded as he saw the tears forming in Mason's eyes. Lauren stepped forward, her investigator's mind already working. "There must be other options, other treatments we haven't considered," but the doctor's gentle headshake stopped her words. Christian, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "We'll find a way. The community, the regulars who've known you for years, they'll help. We can organize fundraisers, reach out to." "No," Jonathan interrupted firmly. "The restaurant's reputation is already damaged because of Logan's lies. I won't have people thinking we're using an illness to gain sympathy." His mother had taught him pride, if nothing else. Mason, who had been quietly processing everything, suddenly stood up. "You can't give up. You're all I have left. You're the closest thing to a father I've known." Since his voice broke, and he ran from the room, unable to face the possibility of losing another parent figure. Christian followed him, leaving Jonathan and Lauren with the doctor. In the hallway, they could hear Mason's muffled sobs. Jonathan closed his eyes, remembering his own grief when his mother received a similar diagnosis. History was repeating itself in the cruelest way. The doctor gave them a moment before continuing with the practical details. Treatment needed to start immediately. They would need to adjust the restaurant's hours. Side effects would make cooking difficult, if not impossible. Each word was another blow to the dream Jonathan had promised to keep alive. Later that evening, back at the restaurant, Jonathan stood in his mother's kitchen, running his hands over the worn countertops. The dinner rush would start soon, people coming in expecting the same quality, the same love in every dish that Sarah had always provided. How could he tell them that the legacy they trusted might end with him? Mason had finally calmed down enough to return, his eyes red but determined. He picked up Sarah's recipe book, opening it to her special chicken soup, the one she claimed could heal any illness. "We'll make this," he declared, his voice stronger than he felt. "Every day, just like she did. It helped others, it can help you too." Jonathan watched the boy gather ingredients, seeing both Thomas's determination and Sarah's spirit in his movements. The choice crystallized in that moment: he would fight, not just for himself, but for this boy who had already lost too much, for his mother's dream that had given hope to so many. Christian and Lauren exchanged glances, seeing the resolve form on Jonathan's face. They knew the battle ahead would be harder than anything Logan had thrown at them. But as Mason started the soup, filling the kitchen with the familiar sense of healing and hope, they also knew they would face it together. Jonathan picked up his mother's old apron, the one she'd worn through years of serving not just food, but love and comfort to everyone who walked through their door. "Well," he said, managing a small smile, "I guess we better start teaching Mason all the recipes a bit faster than planned." The dinner rush would start soon. Cancer or not, people would come seeking the warmth and comfort the Heritage Kitchen had always provided. Jonathan tied on his apron, ignoring the tremor in his hands. He had promised his mother to keep her legacy alive, and now that promise had taken on an even more urgent meaning. Lauren's investigation into Logan began as a professional duty but quickly became a journey into her own past. Working late one night in her office, cross-referencing property records related to the Heritage Kitchen, she found something that made her blood run cold: her own birth certificate, filed away in Sarah Walker's personal records. The document revealed a truth she'd never known: her real name was Lauren Walker, not Lauren Mitchell as she'd always believed. Sarah Walker wasn't just the owner of the restaurant she was investigating, she was her mother. And Jonathan, the man she'd been quietly defending against Logan's attacks, was her brother. Memories flooded back, fragments of a childhood she'd thought were dreams: a warm kitchen, a woman's gentle singing, the smell of fresh baked bread. She'd been taken away at age 3 during a bitter divorce, her father changing her name and cutting all ties with her mother. He'd told her she was orphaned, that she had no family left. With shaking hands, she pulled out more documents, letters from Sarah to various agencies trying to track her down, birthday cards never sent, photographs of a little girl she barely recognized as herself. Each piece of paper was a testament to a mother's relentless search for her lost daughter. In Sarah's recipe book, which she'd borrowed from Jonathan for her investigation, she now noticed the subtle clues she'd overlooked. Certain recipes were dated with her birthday. Notes in the margins spoke of a little princess who loved strawberry cake, her favorite dessert even now. Her mother had woven her memory into every page, keeping her alive in the only way she could. When she confronted Jonathan with the truth, she found him in the kitchen after closing, teaching Mason a new recipe. The resemblance between them, now that she knew to look for it, was startling. They had the same eyes, the same way of gesturing when they spoke. I think I'm your sister," she said, laying out the documents on the counter. "Sarah Walker was my mother too." Her voice trembled as she watched recognition dawn in Jonathan's eyes. He staggered back, gripping the counter for support. "Lauren Mitchell," he whispered. "Mum searched for you for years. She hired private investigators, wrote to every adoption agency. She never gave up hoping she'd find you." Christian and Mason watched in stunned silence as brother and sister stared at each other, seeing their shared features for the first time. Jonathan slowly reached for the recipe book, turning to a specific page, a birthday cake recipe with Lauren's birth date carefully noted. "She made this cake every year on your birthday," he said softly. Even after the cancer. She wanted you to have a cake, waiting if you ever found your way home. His voice broke on the last words. Lauren touched the page gently, her fingers tracing her mother's handwriting. I always felt drawn to this place, she admitted. From the first inspection, something about it felt like coming home. Tears fell onto the yellowed paper. Mason, who understood better than anyone the emotion of discovering family, quietly began gathering ingredients. We should make it, he said. The cake. It's what Mrs. Sarah would want. As they baked together, Jonathan told Lauren stories about their mother, her kindness, her strength, her unwavering belief that family could transcend any distance. Christian watched them work, seeing the same natural rhythm in their movements, the same instinctive understanding of the kitchen. Logan knew Lauren realized suddenly, her hands covered in flour. That's why he's been so focused on destroying this place. He knew I was investigating him, and he knew if I spent enough time here I might discover the truth. Jonathan nodded grimly. He was here when Mum got the final letter saying they'd lost track of you completely. He saw what it did to her. He's always used people's pain against them. The cake they baked that night wasn't perfect, the layers weren't even, and the frosting was a bit messy. But when they lit the candles, the flame illuminated more than just the dessert. It lit up a family reuniting, a sister reclaiming her heritage, a brother finding a piece of his heart he thought was lost forever. "Welcome home," little sister Jonathan said softly, using the nickname their mother had always saved for her lost daughter. Lauren broke down then, letting years of unconscious loneliness and searching pour out as her newfound brother held her. Christian and Mason stepped back, giving them space. But they were part of this too, this growing family that the Heritage Kitchen seemed to attract and nurture. The recipe book lay open beside them, Sarah's careful notes bearing witness to a mother's love that had finally brought her children back together. But they all knew this discovery would make Logan even more dangerous. He'd lost his leverage over Lauren, and a united Walker family posed a greater threat to his plans. The war for the Heritage Kitchen was about to enter a new phase with higher stakes than ever before. Christian's sacrifice for Mason came during one of Logan's most brutal attacks on the restaurant. It was a busy Friday evening when 3 of Logan's thugs entered, pretending to be regular customers. They waited until the dining room was full before starting their rehearsed disruption, loudly complaining about food quality and service. Mason, who was serving their table, recognized one of them from the night of the fire. His hands trembled slightly as he approached with their orders, but he held his composure, just as Jonathan had taught him. The first sign of real trouble came when one of the men deliberately knocked his plate to the floor, shattering it. "Clumsy brat," the man snarled, loud enough for other diners to hear. This place lets street trash serve food. Now his companions snickered, and Mason felt his face burn with shame as other customers began to stare. Christian, watching from across the room, saw the familiar pattern emerging. He'd witnessed similar tactics before they burned down his martial arts school. The public humiliation, the escalating tension, the careful orchestration of accidents. That would drive customers away and create scenes perfect for social media. When one of the men grabbed Mason's arm, complaining about a non-existent hair in his food, Christian moved with the swift precision of his martial arts training. He placed himself between Mason and the increasingly aggressive customers, his voice calm but firm. "Gentlemen, I'll have to ask you to leave." The leader of the group stood slowly, towering over Christian. "Or what, waiter?" "You'll serve us to death." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Other customers began gathering their things, sensing the impending violence. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. One of the men lunged for Mason, but Christian reacted instantly, pushing the boy clear. The punch meant for Mason caught Christian in the ribs instead. Years of training took over as he defended himself, but he was careful not to strike back. Any violence on their part would just play into Logan's hands. Jonathan emerged from the kitchen to find his dining room in chaos. Lauren, who had been having dinner at her usual table, was already calling the police. But the damage was escalating quickly. One of the men grabbed a hot coffee pot, hurling it toward Mason. Christian's decision was instantaneous. He threw himself in front of the boy, taking the full impact of the scalding liquid across his back and shoulders. The pain was excruciating, but he maintained his defensive stance, shielding Mason until help could arrive. The thugs, realizing they'd gone too far, fled just before the police arrived. The damage was done not just to Christian's body, but to the restaurant's reputation. Social media was already buzzing with videos of the violent incident, carefully edited to make it look like the restaurant staff had instigated the conflict. In the emergency room later that night, as doctors treated his second-degree burns, Christian finally revealed the full story of his past to Mason. "I had a student once, about your age," he said, wincing as the nurses applied bandages. "When Logan's men burned down my school, I couldn't save him. I promised myself never again." Mason sat beside the hospital bed, guilt weighing heavily on him. "You shouldn't have. It should have been me. I'm not worth." Christian cut him off with a stern look he remembered from his teaching days. "Your family, Mason. And family protects each other. That's what your father did for Jonathan, what Jonathan does for you, and what I'll always do. It's not about being worth it, it's about love." Jonathan and Lauren arrived with fresh clothes and Sarah's special healing salve, a recipe she'd developed for burns and cuts in the kitchen. As Lauren carefully applied it to Christian's wounds, her touch gentler than any nurse's, something shifted in their relationship. The professional distance she'd maintained began to melt away. "I can't lose this job," Christian muttered, trying to sit up despite the pain. "The restaurant needs." "You're not going anywhere," Jonathan interrupted firmly. "You're not just an employee, Christian. You're part of this family. We'll face Logan together." Mason, still shaken but determined, added, "I'll learn to defend myself better. You can teach me when you're healed. We won't let them win." As they talked, Lauren's investigator instincts kicked in. The attack was too orchestrated, too perfectly timed. "Logan's getting desperate," she observed. "He's taking bigger risks, making mistakes. We can use that." Christian nodded, then immediately regretted the movement as pain shot through his shoulders. He's showing his hand too clearly now. People will start asking questions. They didn't know it then, but Christian's sacrifice would indeed become a turning point. The community, seeing the truth behind the edited videos, began to rally around the Heritage Kitchen. Regular customers started sharing their own stories of the restaurant's kindness, drowning out Logan's manufactured narratives. And in that hospital room, as Mason carefully helped Christian sip some of Sarah's healing soup that Jonathan had brought, they realized their family had grown stronger. Every attack, every sacrifice, every moment of protection and love bound them closer together. Logan had tried to break them with violence, but he'd only succeeded in proving what Sarah had always known, that true family is born not just of blood, but of choice, sacrifice, and unconditional love. The community's response to the Heritage Kitchen's struggles began quietly but grew into something extraordinary. It started with Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly regular who had been coming to the restaurant since Sarah's time. After hearing about Jonathan's diagnosis and Christian's injury, she stationed herself at her usual corner table and began making phone calls. "This restaurant saved my Daniel," she told anyone who would listen, her voice thick with emotion. "When my boy came back from the war, broken inside and out, Sarah's soup and Jonathan's kindness brought him back to us. Now it's our turn to help them." Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The local Korean church group, who had held their after-service lunches at the restaurant for decades, organized a prayer vigil that turned into an impromptu street festival. They set up tables outside, bringing their own dishes to share alongside Jonathan's classics. The high school baseball team, who had celebrated every victory and mourned every loss over Jonathan's signature comfort food, arrived in uniform to help with repairs and cleaning. Their coach, tears in his eyes, recalled how Sarah had fed the whole team for free during the recession when many parents couldn't afford team dinners. Mason watched in amazement as people he'd only known as customers revealed themselves to be something more family. The gruff construction worker who ate breakfast at the counter every morning turned out to be a master carpenter, arriving after hours to repair the damaged dining room furniture. The quiet woman who always ordered chamomile tea was actually a renowned oncologist, offering to review Jonathan's case pro bono. Lauren's investigation into Logan's activities had uncovered a pattern of community destruction, but now she was witnessing its opposite, community restoration. Each person who came through the door brought not just their skills or resources, but their stories of how the Heritage Kitchen had touched their lives. "Your mother, a retired teacher, told Jonathan as she helped organize a fundraising calendar, she used to pack extra lunches for my students who couldn't afford them. Never said a word about it, just made sure those children never went hungry." Her contribution to the calendar was Sarah's secret recipe for love lunch cookies, the very ones she'd packed for those children. The local newspaper, initially hesitant to counter Logan's influential narrative, found their courage after their veteran food critic suffered a heart attack. He wrote from his hospital bed about how Jonathan had kept the restaurant open late one snowy night years ago, ensuring his diabetic wife had a proper meal during a power outage. The article went viral, drawing attention from larger media outlets. Christian, still recovering from his burns, became the unofficial coordinator of the community effort. From his temporary command post, a comfortable recliner donated by the furniture store down the street, he matched volunteers with tasks, his martial arts students providing security during business hours. The restaurant's dining room transformed into a command center of love and resistance. The walls, once bare except for Sarah's photos, now displayed hundreds of handwritten notes sharing memories and messages of support. A local artist painted a stunning mural of Sarah on the back wall, capturing her essence so perfectly that Mason often caught Jonathan staring at it, lost in memory. Even the menu evolved to reflect the community's embrace. Regulars began contributing family recipes, each one vetted by Jonathan and Mason, then adapted to include Sarah's special touch. Mrs. Rodriguez's empanadas joined forces with Mr. Kim's bulgogi, creating fusion dishes that represented the neighborhood's diverse heritage. The most touching moment came when the children from the local elementary school arrived with their art teacher. They had spent weeks creating a quilt of drawings, each panel depicting a memory of the restaurant. There was Sarah serving soup on a snowy day, Jonathan teaching a young chef clearly Mason, and Christian defending the restaurant like a superhero. "This place," the art teacher explained, "hanging the quilt in a place of honor, teaches our children what community really means. It's not just about food, it's about belonging." Mason, helping to arrange the panels, found one that showed him serving food to other kids. The artist having drawn a halo around his head, he had to turn away to hide his tears. The financial support, while crucial, was secondary to the uprising of love and solidarity. Local businesses began offering their services. The printing shop produced new menus free of charge, the flower shop kept fresh arrangements on every table, and the ice cream parlor created a special heritage swirl flavor with proceeds going to Jonathan's treatment fund. But perhaps the most powerful response came from other restaurants in the area. Instead of seeing the Heritage Kitchen struggles as an opportunity to gain customers, they recognized the threat Logan posed to all independent businesses. A coalition formed, sharing resources, staff, and supplies to ensure the kitchen could keep running even when Jonathan needed to rest. Through it all, Mason continued learning every recipe, every technique, now taught not just by Jonathan, but by a rotating cast of community cooks eager to share their knowledge. The kitchen became a classroom where traditions merged and evolved, each dish telling a story of resilience and connection. The response wasn't just about saving a restaurant, it was about preserving the heart of a community. Every meal served became an act of defiance against Logan's cold corporate greed. Every smile exchanged a reaffirmation of what Sarah had always believed, that food made with love could heal more than just hunger. As Jonathan watched his mother's legacy not just survive but thrive in unexpected ways, he understood that she had built something far more enduring than just a restaurant. She had created a tapestry of human connections, woven together with love, food, and the simple act of caring for others. The romance between Christian and Lauren blossomed in unexpected moments, growing stronger through shared struggles and quiet acts of support. It began one evening after closing, as Lauren helped Christian change his bandages. His burns were healing, but the scars would remain, both physical and emotional. "You don't have to do this," Christian said softly, wincing as she applied Sarah's healing salve. "A health inspector shouldn't be playing nurse to a waiter." Lauren's hands paused, her touch gentle against his scarred skin. "Is that all you think you are?" A waiter. Her voice carried a warmth that made Christian's heart skip. "I've seen you teach Mason self-defense, coordinate community support, stand up against Logan's men. You're a protector, Christian. A guardian." Their eyes met in the dim kitchen light, and something shifted between them. The professional distance Lauren had maintained began to crumble, like sugar dissolving in hot tea. Christian saw beyond her official persona to the woman searching for her own place of belonging. Their first real date wasn't planned. After a particularly long day of dealing with Logan's latest attempts to discredit the restaurant, they found themselves walking through the neighborhood, talking about everything and nothing. Christian shared stories about his martial arts school, the students he'd lost touch with after the fire. Lauren spoke about growing up feeling something was missing, never knowing it was the family she'd lost. "I used to dream about a kitchen," she confessed, stopping under a streetlight, warm and bright, with someone singing while they cooked. "I thought I'd imagined it, but it was this place. It was Sarah, my mother, singing while she baked." Christian took her hand, understanding loss in a way few others could. "Sometimes the heart remembers what the mind forgets," he said softly. They stood there, connected by shared pain and growing hope, until the streetlights began to dim. Their relationship deepened through small moments, Lauren bringing Christian his favorite tea during long shifts, Christian teaching her the defensive moves he'd shown Mason, both of them working late into the night reviewing security footage and health code regulations, looking for ways to protect the restaurant. Jonathan watched their growing closeness with quiet approval. "Mom would have loved this," he told Mason one evening, as they observed Christian and Lauren sharing a quiet dinner after closing. "She always said love grows best in kitchen light." Mason, wise beyond his years, nodded. They both needed a home, he observed. Like me. Like all of us, the boy had become surprisingly invested in their relationship, often creating reasons for them to work together or accidentally leaving them alone in the kitchen. Their first kiss happened during a crisis. Logan's men had just left after another intimidation attempt, and Lauren was furiously documenting the damage. Christian caught her hand as she photographed broken plates, pulling her close. "We can't let him win," Lauren whispered, her professional facade cracking. "We won't," Christian promised, and then, without planning or pretense, he kissed her. It was gentle and fierce at once, like everything about them, the protector and the investigator, finding strength in each other. But the kitchen staff began noticing changes, Lauren staying later than any health inspection required, Christian's smile growing brighter despite his injuries, their shared looks across the dining room speaking volumes. Even the regular customers picked up on it, some of the older ones nodding approvingly at this new chapter in the Heritage Kitchen story. Their love grew like a carefully tended recipe, simple ingredients combining to create something extraordinary. Lauren found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, her childhood fears, her loneliness, her secret dreams. Christian opened up about his guilt over the fire, his fear of failing those who depended on him, his hope for redemption. One night, after a particularly difficult day of Jonathan's treatment, they sat together in the empty restaurant. Lauren was reviewing case files, Christian doing the books, when she suddenly looked up. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said, as straightforward as one of her inspection reports. "And it terrifies me." Christian reached across the table, his scarred hands encompassing hers. "Being afraid doesn't make you weak," he said. "It makes you human. And I've been falling in love with you since you first stood up to Logan." Their relationship became another form of resistance against Logan's attacks, love flourishing in the face of hatred, hope growing despite fear. They began planning a future together, one that included not just themselves but the entire Heritage Kitchen family. Mason caught them dancing in the kitchen one night, swaying to the old radio Sarah used to play. Instead of teasing them, he simply smiled and joined Jonathan at the counter, both of them watching this new kind of family take shape. "Do you think they know?" Mason asked Jonathan quietly. "Know what?" "That they're healing each other, just like Mrs. Sarah's recipes heal people." Jonathan smiled, seeing his mother's wisdom living on in this young boy's observations. The Heritage Kitchen had always been about more than food. It was about creating connections, nurturing love, building family from the ingredients life provided. As Christian and Lauren's love story unfolded, it became clear that Sarah's legacy lived on in unexpected ways. She had created not just a restaurant, but a place where broken hearts could mend, where love could grow from the ashes of loss, where family meant more than blood. Their romance became another thread in the tapestry of the Heritage Kitchen story, a reminder that even in the darkest times, love could light the way forward, one shared meal, one gentle touch, one brave heart at a time. Mason's journey learning Jonathan's special recipes became more than just culinary training. It was a passage through grief, love, and healing. Each dish carried a story, a memory, a piece of Sarah's wisdom that Jonathan passed on with careful patience, even as his illness made teaching more challenging. They began with the simplest recipes: the chicken soup that had comforted countless souls, the bread that filled the restaurant with its welcoming aroma each morning. But it wasn't just about ingredients and techniques. Jonathan taught Mason the heart of each dish, the way Sarah had taught him. "Watch the soup," Jonathan would say, his voice weaker but his spirit strong. "See how the carrots and celery dance together? That's harmony. Mom used to say every ingredient has its moment to shine, just like every person has their time to be special." The lessons often extended late into the night, after the restaurant closed. Christian and Lauren would find them still in the kitchen, Jonathan sitting at the prep counter while Mason practiced, their quiet conversations punctuated by the rhythmic sound of chopping and the gentle bubbling of pots. The secret to the meatballs, Jonathan explained one evening, isn't in the seasoning. It's in the memory of the first time Mom made them for a homeless veteran who hadn't eaten a home-cooked meal in years. She put so much love into them that the man cried. From that day on, we always make them thinking of someone who needs comfort. Mason absorbed everything, not just the recipes and techniques, but the stories, the philosophy, the love that went into every dish. He learned that the marinara sauce needed to simmer for exactly 3 hours because that's how long it took Sarah to tell Jonathan about his sister Lauren being taken away. The sauce's slow reduction mirrored her tears, its rich depth born from profound loss. As Jonathan's treatments intensified, making it harder for him to demonstrate techniques, Mason became his hands in the kitchen. They developed a beautiful synchronicity, Jonathan describing the subtle nuances of a dish while Mason executed them, each growing stronger through the other's support. "Your father had this same gift," Jonathan told Mason one quiet morning as they prepared the day's first batch of pastries. "Thomas could feel the soul of a dish, just like you do. He used to say cooking was like a martial art. It required discipline, respect, and heart." Some recipes were harder to master than others. The celebration cake, the one Sarah had created for Lauren's birthdays, took weeks of practice. Each attempt brought Mason closer to perfection, but also closer to understanding the depth of love that had gone into its creation. "Not quite," Jonathan would say gently, tasting each version. "Mom made it lighter, like hope. She wanted it to be ready when Lauren came home. Mason would start again, determined to capture not just the taste but the feeling Sarah had baked into every layer. The hardest lesson came with Sarah's special healing soup, the one she'd made when anyone in the community was sick or hurting. Jonathan's hands shook as he shared this recipe, knowing it might soon be needed for him. The ginger must be cut paper thin, he instructed, his voice barely a whisper. Mum said it was like slicing away pain, one piece at a time. The broth needs to be clear as truth, warm as love. Mason worked through his tears, each ingredient a prayer for Jonathan's recovery. The restaurant's regulars began noticing the change in the food. Though Jonathan could no longer cook, his spirit lived in every dish Mason prepared. Customers would close their eyes, tasting something familiar, yet knew the perfect blend of Sarah's legacy and Mason's growing talent. "It tastes like memory," one elderly patron said, savoring the chicken soup. Like coming home after a long time away. Mason understood then what Jonathan and Sarah had always known, that food could bridge the gap between past and present, between loss and love. As Mason mastered each recipe, Jonathan shared more than just cooking techniques. He passed on the stories of the community, the regular customers who had become family, the traditions that had kept the heritage kitchen alive through decades of change. "Every recipe in this book," Jonathan said one evening, his hand resting on Sarah's worn recipe collection, "is a piece of our history. When you cook them, you're not just making food, you're keeping stories alive, keeping love flowing, keeping hope burning." Mason took this responsibility seriously. Each dish he prepared became a way of fighting back against Logan's attempts to destroy their home, against Jonathan's illness, against the fear of loss that haunted them all. In the kitchen, he found his strength, his purpose, his way of protecting the family that had saved him. The final recipe Jonathan taught him was Sarah's secret bread, the one that had started it all. As they worked the dough together, Jonathan's hands guiding Mason's through the familiar motions, they both knew this was more than a cooking lesson. It was a passing of the torch, a continuation of Sarah's legacy through another generation. "Remember," Jonathan said, watching Mason shape the loaf with sure hands, "Mom always said bread is life itself. It rises through adversity, grows stronger through kneading, and becomes beautiful through patience. Just like family. Just like love." That night, as the smell of freshly baked bread filled the kitchen, Mason realized he had learned far more than recipes. He had learned about resilience, about family, about the power of love to transform simple ingredients into something miraculous. In mastering Sarah's recipes, he had found his way of keeping her spirit and Jonathan's alive in every meal served at the Heritage Kitchen. Logan's final attack on the Heritage Kitchen came during the restaurant's busiest night of the year, the anniversary of Sarah's passing, when the community traditionally gathered to celebrate her memory. Jonathan, weakened by his latest round of treatment but determined to be present, watched from a corner table as Mason masterfully executed each of Sarah's special recipes. The evening had begun beautifully. The dining room was filled with familiar faces, the walls adorned with photos and memories shared by longtime customers. Christian, his burns finally healed, moved gracefully between tables while Lauren helped coordinate the flow of guests. The atmosphere was one of triumph and remembrance. Then Logan arrived, not with thugs or threats, but with city officials and health inspectors, ones Lauren didn't recognize. They carried official-looking documents and grim expressions. Behind them, news cameras began setting up, tipped off about what was to come. "Ladies and gentlemen," Logan announced, his voice carrying through the stunned silence that fell over the dining room. "I regret to inform you that this establishment has been operating under false pretenses. We have evidence of serious health code violations, tax fraud, and most disturbing, the employment of undocumented workers." He gestured toward Mason, who stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, still holding a tray of Sarah's beloved celebration cake, including a minor with no legal guardian, working in dangerous conditions. "This ends tonight." The officials began moving through the restaurant, posting notices and asking customers to leave, but something unexpected happened. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly regular who had known Sarah for decades, stood up shakily but defiantly. "My husband was a health inspector for 30 years, she declared, her voice quavering but strong. "He taught me every code, every regulation. I eat here every day, and I can tell you this place is cleaner, safer, and more honest than any restaurant in the city." Others began standing too. The local priest, the high school principal, the fire chief, pillars of the community who had been touched by Sarah's legacy. They formed a human chain, linking arms around the perimeter of the dining room. Logan's smirk faltered as he faced this wall of resistance. He pulled out his final weapon, a thick folder of documents. "Perhaps you'd all be interested in knowing what really happened to Sarah Walker's money in her final months. How her own son—" "That's enough." The voice that cut through the tension was unexpected. It belonged to Logan's own secretary, Martha, who had slipped in unnoticed. She stepped forward, clutching her own folder. "I can't stay silent anymore." Martha's hands shook as she opened her folder, revealing copies of checks and letters. Sarah Walker didn't lose her money, she gave it away. To help people, including you, Mr. Logan. The loan you never repaid, the one that started your real estate empire. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Logan lunged for the documents, but Lauren was faster, her investigator's instincts taking over. She grabbed the folder, quickly scanning its contents as Jonathan struggled to his feet. "Mum kept records of everything," he said, his voice weak but clear. "Every loan, every act of kindness. She believed in people, Logan. She believed in you." Mason, still holding the celebration cake, suddenly understood the pattern in Sarah's recipe book, the careful notes about amounts matching dates and names. They weren't just recipes, they were a coded record of her generosity. The fake health inspectors began backing away, realizing they'd been drawn into something bigger than they'd understood. The news cameras, however, kept rolling, capturing every moment of Logan's unraveling. "You think this changes anything?" Logan snarled, his composure cracking. "This place is still finished. I've made sure of that. The bank will foreclose by the end of the month, and then—" "No, they won't." A new voice joined the fray as the bank manager himself stepped forward from among the customers. "Not after I've seen these loan documents. Sarah Walker's original mortgage agreement had special provisions that Mr. Logan here has been illegally trying to override." The community stand had given Lauren time to broadcast everything live on social media. The restaurant was flooded with messages of support, with people sharing their own stories of Sarah's kindness and Logan's manipulation. Mason, setting down the cake, moved to stand beside Jonathan. In that moment he looked so much like his father Thomas that Logan actually stepped back. "Mrs. Sarah taught me that food made with love can heal anything," Mason said clearly. "Even hatred. Even fear." He cut a piece of the celebration cake, Sarah's special recipe, and offered it to Logan. The gesture, so simple yet profound, seemed to break something in the man. Logan's hands trembled as he looked at the cake, remembering countless meals shared at this very counter when he was young and struggling. "Sarah believed in second chances," Jonathan said softly, placing a supportive hand on Mason's shoulder. "She never gave up on anyone. Not even you, Logan." The police were arriving now, drawn by the commotion and the gathering crowd outside, but they weren't there for the Heritage Kitchen. They were there to investigate Logan's fraudulent documents and corrupt officials. As Logan was led away, the community erupted in celebration. The human chain transformed into a circle of dancing, laughing people. Christian pulled Lauren into a joyful embrace, while Mason began serving the celebration cake to everyone. Jonathan sank back into his chair, exhausted but smiling. He looked around at his family, not just Mason, Christian, and Lauren, but every person in that room who had stood up for Sarah's legacy. In the kitchen, the soup she had taught him to make still simmered, filling the air with the scent of home and healing. The Heritage Kitchen had faced its darkest hour and emerged stronger, its heart still beating with the rhythm of love and community that Sarah had instilled so many years ago. But as Jonathan watched Logan being escorted out, he felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for the man who had forgotten what Sarah had tried to teach them all, that true wealth lies not in what you own, but in what you give away. The revelation about Mason's real father came in the midst of the chaos following Logan's arrest. As the police were taking statements from witnesses, an elderly man made his way through the crowd. His military uniform was worn but immaculate, and his face bore a striking resemblance to both Mason and Thomas Reynolds. "I've been watching this place for weeks," the man said, his voice gruff with emotion, trying to find the courage to come in. "I'm Colonel James Reynolds. Thomas was my son, and that boy," he pointed to Mason, who was helping clean up the aftermath of the confrontation. "That's my grandson. That's my grandson. Jonathan, still weak from his treatment, gripped his chair tightly. The colonel's presence brought back a flood of memories: the climbing accident, Thomas's sacrifice, the promise made. "We've been trying to find you," he managed to say. "After Thomas. After the accident." The colonel nodded, his eyes never leaving Mason. "Thomas's wife, she never told me about the baby. By the time I found out, she had passed away and Mason had disappeared into the system. I've been searching for years." Lauren, her investigator's instinct still sharp, quickly verified the colonel's identity. Military records, old photos, and DNA tests would later confirm everything. But in that moment, looking at the 3 generations of Reynolds men together, no proof was needed. The resemblance was undeniable. Mason approached cautiously, drawn by some inexplicable force to this stranger who carried himself so much like the man in the old photographs. You knew my father?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The colonel's military composure cracked. "Your father was the bravest man I ever knew. And from what I've seen, how you fought for this place, for these people, you're just like him." Christian moved protectively closer to Mason, but the boy stood straight and tall, just as Thomas would have. "Tell me about him," Mason requested, "please." "Everything." Over Sarah's healing soup, the colonel shared stories of Thomas's childhood, his dedication to serving others, his friendship with Jonathan. Each tale revealed how deeply Thomas's spirit lived on in his son, the same determination, the same instinct to protect, the same ability to see the good in others. The day he saved Jonathan, the colonel said, his voice thick with pride and grief, he didn't hesitate. "That's who your father was. He believed some things were worth any sacrifice." Jonathan, listening from his corner, finally shared the full story of that day on the mountain. How Thomas had seen the danger first, how he had pushed Jonathan clear of the falling rocks, how his last words had been about his unborn child. "He made me promise," Jonathan said, looking at Mason, "to find you, to protect you if I could. When you showed up at our door that night, it was like Thomas himself had led you here." The colonel reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a set of dog tags. "These were your father's. They should have been yours years ago." His hands shook as he placed them around Mason's neck. Lauren, who understood better than most the impact of discovering family, watched as Mason touched the metal tags with trembling fingers. The boy who had been alone for so long now stood surrounded by 3 generations of love: his grandfather's legacy, his father's sacrifice, and Jonathan's unwavering care. Christian placed a supportive hand on Mason's shoulder. "Family finds its way back together," he said softly. Sarah always believed that his words carried extra weight now, with Lauren's recent discovery of her own connection to the restaurant. The colonel looked around the restaurant, taking in the photos on the walls, the worn cookbook on the counter, the sense of home that Sarah had created. "Thomas would have loved this place," he said. "He always said a real home wasn't about the building, it was about the people who made it special." Mason, still processing this profound change in his life, suddenly turned to Jonathan with concern in his eyes. "This doesn't change anything between us, does it? You're still..." Jonathan pulled him into a fierce hug, mindful of the dog tags now hanging between them. "I promised your father I would be your family, Mason. Having your grandfather here doesn't change that, it just makes our family bigger." The colonel watched this exchange with tears in his eyes. "I'm not here to take him away," he assured Jonathan. "I'm here to join what you've built, to help protect it, if you'll let me." Lauren, ever practical, was already thinking ahead. With the colonel's testimony about Thomas, we can finally formalize Mason's status. No more hiding, no more fear of the authorities. Christian nodded, adding, and his military connections might help protect the restaurant from any of Logan's remaining allies. Mason stood in the center of this growing circle of protection and love, his father's dog tags cool against his skin. In that moment, he understood something Sarah had written in her cookbook: family is like a good recipe. Sometimes the ingredients come together in unexpected ways, but it's the love that makes it perfect. The colonel, seeing Sarah's handwriting in the open cookbook, smiled softly. "Thomas used to write me about this place, about the amazing woman who ran it. He said she taught him that courage isn't just about facing danger, it's about facing each day with an open heart." As the evening wound down, 4 generations of love filled the heritage kitchen, Sarah's spirit watching over them all, Thomas's sacrifice protecting them, the colonel's arrival completing a circle long left open, and Mason's future stretching bright before them. The dog tags gleamed in the kitchen light, a tangible link between past and present, between loss and discovery, between the father who had saved Jonathan's life and the son who was helping save his mother's legacy. Lauren's discovery of Logan's past crimes emerged through a meticulous investigation that began with Sarah's recipe book and ended in a hidden safe in the restaurant's basement. While helping Christian organize old records after his injury, she noticed a pattern in Sarah's notations that seemed oddly specific: dates, amounts, and initials that didn't match any recipes. "These numbers," she murmured, spreading the pages across the old prep table. "They're not measurements. They're transaction records." Her fingers traced Sarah's elegant handwriting, seeing now how her mother had documented everything in her own subtle way. The breakthrough came when they found a key taped to the back of Sarah's photograph, leading them to a locked drawer in her old desk. Inside was a leather journal, its pages filled with detailed accounts of loans made to community members in need. But it was the final entries that made Lauren's blood run cold. Logan didn't just fail to repay his loan, she realized. Reading the carefully documented notes, he actively worked to hide the money. These transfers, these shell companies her investigators' training kicked in as she began connecting the dots. The evidence painted a damning picture. Logan had used Sarah's loan to start his business empire, but rather than repay her, he had systematically worked to undermine the restaurant. The fire at Christian's martial arts school, the false health violations, the coordinated attacks, they were all part of a larger pattern of corruption and revenge. Most shocking was the discovery about Sarah's final days. He knew about the experimental treatment that could have saved her, Lauren told Jonathan, her voice shaking with anger. But he buried the information, afraid she would ask for loan repayment to cover the costs. The journal contained one final piece of evidence, a letter Sarah had written to Logan shortly before her death. "I don't want the money back," she had written. "I only want you to remember the young man who came to me hungry and afraid, and found not just a meal but a family. That boy had a good heart. I hope he finds it again." Lauren took this evidence to her most trusted colleagues in the health department and law enforcement. The investigation expanded rapidly, revealing a web of corruption that extended far beyond the heritage kitchen. Logan had been systematically targeting small businesses throughout the city, using similar tactics of intimidation and fraud. Christian, reviewing security footage from the past year, identified dozens of instances where Logan's associates had orchestrated accidents and health code violations. Mason, with his sharp memory for faces, helped identify the men who had attacked the restaurant and injured Christian. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Martha, Logan's secretary, had been keeping her own records. Haunted by guilt over her role in his schemes, she had documented everything. When Lauren showed her Sarah's letter, Martha finally broke down and agreed to testify. "Sarah saved my life once too," Martha confessed, pulling out a USB drive containing years of incriminating emails and financial records. "I've been waiting for a chance to make this right." The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed how Logan had manipulated loans, falsified documents, and used intimidation to build his empire. Health inspection reports had been forged, witnesses had been paid off, and competitors had been systematically destroyed. Lauren worked through nights, building an airtight case. She found connections between Logan and various shell companies, all leading back to that initial loan from Sarah. Each discovery revealed a deeper layer of betrayal, not just of Sarah's trust, but of everything she had believed in. "Mom saw the good in him," Jonathan said quietly, looking through the evidence. "She believed he could change. That's why she kept giving him chances." The final piece fell into place when Lauren discovered Logan's connection to the tragic accident that had claimed Thomas Reynolds' life. While not directly responsible, Logan had known about unsafe conditions on the mountain trail but had suppressed the reports, protecting a development deal he had in the works. Mason, upon learning this truth about his father's death, showed remarkable grace. "Mrs. Sarah would want us to use this to stop him from hurting others," he said, "not for revenge." The case Lauren built was comprehensive and undeniable. It showed not just individual crimes, but a pattern of systematic destruction of community bonds for personal gain. Each piece of evidence was a testament to how far Logan had fallen from the young man Sarah had once tried to help. When Lauren finally presented her findings to the authorities, she did so not just as an investigator, but as Sarah's daughter. The evidence was delivered along with copies of Sarah's recipes, a reminder that this case was about more than just financial crimes. It was about the destruction of trust, the betrayal of kindness, and the attempt to erase a legacy of love. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Logan's empire began to crumble as investors withdrew and partners distanced themselves. But more importantly, other small business owners started coming forward with their own stories, creating a wave of testimony that couldn't be ignored. Lauren's investigation had done more than expose crimes, it had revealed the true value of Sarah's legacy. Each loan documented in the recipe book had a story behind it, a life touched, a dream supported. The money Logan had stolen wasn't just currency, it was the tangible form of Sarah's belief in people's capacity to change and grow. As the evidence became public, the community's response was powerful. People began sharing their own stories of Sarah's generosity, of lives changed by a timely loan or a warm meal. The Heritage Kitchen became a symbol of resistance against corporate greed, a reminder that true wealth lies in community bonds and acts of kindness. The recipe book that had started the investigation took on new meaning. It wasn't just a collection of cooking instructions, it was Sarah's testimony to the power of generosity, her belief that feeding people's hearts was as important as feeding their bodies. In exposing Logan's crimes, Lauren had also uncovered the full extent of her mother's legacy, preserved in cups of flour and pinches of herbs, in marginalia and memories, in lives touched and changed forever. Jonathan's condition deteriorated rapidly in the wake of Logan's arrest. The stress of the confrontation, combined with his weakened immune system from chemotherapy, sent him into a critical downward spiral. One morning, while teaching Mason a new recipe, he collapsed in the kitchen, the worn recipe book falling from his trembling hands. The hospital room was sterile and cold, so different from the warm kitchen he'd called home. Mason refused to leave his side, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair, his father's dog tags clutched tightly in his fist. Christian and Lauren took turns maintaining a constant vigil, while the colonel used his military connections to consult specialists. "The cancer has spread more aggressively than we anticipated," the doctor explained gently. "The treatments aren't working as well as we'd hoped." The words fell like heavy stones in the quiet room, each one adding to the weight crushing Mason's heart. Sarah's recipe book lay open on the bedside table, turned to her special healing soup. Mason had been making it daily, following every instruction perfectly, desperately believing in its power to heal just as Sarah had always claimed. But even love, it seemed, had its limits. Jonathan drifted in and out of consciousness, his periods of lucidity growing shorter. During his clear moments he continued teaching Mason, his voice weak but determined, the secret to the perfect bread. He whispered one afternoon, is patience. Just like life, sometimes we have to wait for things to rise in their own time. The restaurant remained open, the community rallying to help. Regular customers took turns in the kitchen, following Sarah's recipes as best they could. But everyone could taste the difference. The missing ingredient was Jonathan's love, the special touch he had inherited from his mother. Mason threw himself into cooking with an almost desperate intensity, as if making each dish perfectly could somehow heal Jonathan. If I can just get it right, he would mutter, starting over again and again. If I can make it taste exactly like Mrs. Sarah's. Christian found him one night, surrounded by failed attempts at Sarah's celebration cake, tears mixing with the flour on his face. She said food made with love could heal anything. Mason sobbed. Why isn't it working? Why can't I make it work? Lauren, who had only recently found her brother, faced the cruel irony of possibly losing him just as they'd reconnected. She spent hours reading Sarah's recipe book, searching for hidden messages, secret cures, anything that might help. But the only messages she found were about love, acceptance, and the importance of family. The Colonel, seeing the toll it was taking on Mason, shared stories about Thomas's own battles, not just the final one that took his life, but all the times he had fought and survived. Sometimes he told his grandson, the bravest thing we can do is just be present for someone we love. Jonathan, during one of his clearer moments, called Mason to his bedside. I need you to understand something, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Some recipes take a lifetime to perfect, and some love lasts beyond that. The doctors suggested hospice care, but the very idea of Jonathan dying anywhere but his mother's kitchen seemed wrong. Against medical advice, they brought him back to the Heritage Kitchen, setting up a hospital bed in the small apartment above the restaurant where he and Sarah had once lived. The smells of cooking wafted up from below. Mason still trying to perfect every recipe, the community still gathering to share meals and memories, life stubbornly continuing despite the shadow of grief hanging over them all. On particularly bad nights, when the pain was worst, Jonathan would ask Mason to read from Sarah's recipe book. The familiar words seemed to soothe him, each recipe a story, each measurement a memory. Mum always said, he murmured once, drifting between sleep and waking, that the real secret ingredient was tomorrow's hope baked into today's bread. The community held candlelight vigils outside the restaurant, their lights twinkling like stars through the apartment windows. Regular customers brought dishes they'd learned from Sarah and Jonathan over the years, each meal a testament to the legacy of love they'd created. Lauren discovered she had her mother's voice and would sing the lullabies she was only just beginning to remember, while Christian kept watch, his protective instincts now helpless against an enemy he couldn't fight. The Colonel shared military stories that somehow always turned into tales about Thomas, about courage, about the strength found in love. But despite their collective love, their desperate prayers, their careful adherence to every recipe for healing that Sarah had left behind, Jonathan continued to fade. The cancer, like Logan's hatred, had taken root too deeply, spreading its darkness through the very heart of the Heritage Kitchen's family. The threat of closure loomed over the Heritage Kitchen like a dark cloud. Despite Logan's arrest and the exposure of his crimes, the financial damage he had inflicted ran deep. Bills had piled up during Jonathan's illness, and the costs of his treatment had drained what little reserves they had left. The bank, though sympathetic to their situation, had obligations to meet. Even with the community's support and fundraising efforts, they were falling short of what was needed to keep the restaurant afloat. The deadline for catching up on mortgage payments was approaching rapidly and options were running out. But Lauren pored over the books late into the night, searching for any solution they might have missed. "There has to be a way," she muttered, surrounded by financial statements and legal documents. "Mom wouldn't want this place to end like this." Christian watched the regular customers, many of whom had been coming for decades, savoring each meal as if it might be their last at the beloved establishment. Some brought their children, wanting them to taste Sarah's recipes while they still could, to understand what this place had meant to the community. Mason took it the hardest. Each morning he would arrive before dawn, just as Sarah used to do, to bake the day's bread. But now there was a desperation to his movements, as if he could somehow save the restaurant through sheer force of will and perfect execution of her recipes. "Mrs. Sarah built this place from nothing," he said one morning, kneading dough with tears in his eyes. "She did it alone with just her recipes and her love for people. Why can't we do the same?" The Colonel, watching his grandson struggle, understood the weight of legacy all too well. "Sometimes," he said gently, "the bravest thing we can do is accept change, even when it breaks our heart." The news began to spread throughout the neighborhood. Other local businesses, themselves struggling in the aftermath of Logan's schemes, could offer little more than sympathy. The restaurant that had helped so many through hard times was now facing its own moment of crisis. Mrs. Rodriguez, their longest-standing customer, brought in a jar full of saved coins. "It's not much," she said, her voice shaking, "but this place fed my children when I couldn't. I've been saving for years, just in case." The gesture, though touching, highlighted the cruel reality they faced. The amount needed was far beyond what their loyal but modest community could provide. Even selling everything of value wouldn't generate enough to save the restaurant. Lauren discovered that some of Logan's former associates, sensing an opportunity, were already making plans to convert the space into an upscale wine bar. The very thought of Sarah's kitchen being transformed into something so contrary to her vision was almost unbearable. Christian found himself walking through the dining room at night, remembering all the moments of healing and hope that had occurred within these walls. The table where homeless veterans found hot meals and respect. The corner booth where troubled teens could always find a sympathetic ear. The counter where Sarah had once served a young, hungry Logan, believing in his potential for good. The staff, loyal to the end, offered to work without pay, but Jonathan, even in his weakened state, refused. Mom believed in treating people with dignity, he insisted. "We won't dishonor that, even now." Mason spent hours in the kitchen, cooking each of Sarah's recipes one last time, methodically documenting every detail, every subtle variation, every secret that made them special. "Even if we lose the restaurant," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we can't lose the heart of what she created." The health department, now under new leadership following Lauren's investigation, granted them every possible extension. But regulations were regulations, and without proper funding to maintain standards, they couldn't operate indefinitely. The final blow came when they received notice that the building's infrastructure needed major repairs they couldn't possibly afford. The same walls that had witnessed countless moments of joy and comfort were now literally crumbling around them. Lauren found herself standing in the kitchen late one night, touching the worn surfaces her mother had once touched, breathing in the familiar smells that were now tinged with the bitter scent of ending. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm sorry we couldn't protect your dream." The community began planning a farewell celebration, though no one could bring themselves to call it that. They would gather one last time in the place that had been more than a restaurant. It had been a sanctuary, a school of life, a home for the heartbroken and the hopeful alike. But even as they faced the seemingly inevitable end of the Heritage Kitchen, none of them could quite believe that Sarah's legacy could truly be confined to just a building. Something this precious, this deeply woven into the fabric of so many lives, had to find a way to survive. Christian's injury from protecting Mason had more severe consequences than anyone initially realized. The scalding liquid that had burned his back had damaged more than just skin. It had affected his spine, causing increasing pain and mobility issues that threatened his ability to continue working at the restaurant. The doctor's prognosis was grim. Without extensive surgery and rehabilitation procedures far beyond what their insurance would cover, Christian faced the possibility of permanent disability. And the proud protector, who had once moved with the grace of a martial artist, now struggled to carry even a single plate without wincing in pain. Lauren found him one morning, before dawn, practicing his old martial arts forms in the empty dining room, each movement a battle against his failing body. "I won't let them win," he gasped through the pain. "I can't let everyone down," she watched, her heart breaking, as he stumbled and caught himself on a table. Mason blamed himself for Christian's condition. "If I had been stronger, faster, more aware," he would say, the guilt eating at him. The boy who had finally found family now feared he was the cause of its unraveling. Christian tried to reassure him, but the pain evident in every movement undermined his words of comfort. The injury affected more than just Christian's physical abilities. His nightmares returned memories of the fire that destroyed his martial arts school, now mixed with the terror of the restaurant attack. Lauren would find him awake at odd hours, standing guard over the restaurant despite his pain, determined to prevent any further harm to their family. The colonel, recognizing the symptoms of trauma from his military experience, tried to help. "A warrior's strength isn't just in his body," he told Christian. "It's in his heart, his spirit, his ability to adapt." But adaptation seemed impossible when every movement brought fresh waves of agony. The restaurant's regular customers noticed the change in Christian. The confident stance was gone, replaced by careful, measured movements. Some offered referrals to specialists, others started a separate fund for his medical expenses, but the costs remained overwhelming. Jonathan, watching from his sick bed, felt the weight of yet another failure. "Mom would have known how to help," he whispered to Lauren. "She always knew how to fix broken things, but Sarah's recipe book, for all its wisdom about healing hearts, contained no cure for damaged nerves and muscles." The physical therapy sessions were grueling, each small improvement purchased with hours of pain. Christian pushed himself too hard, too fast, desperate to return to his role as the restaurant's protector. The setbacks were frequent and demoralizing. Lauren watched the man she loved struggle with basic tasks he had once performed effortlessly. Their dancing in the kitchen became a distant memory as Christian could barely stand for long periods. Yet he refused to give up, drawing on the same determination that had helped him survive the loss of his first business. The most difficult moment came when Christian dropped an entire tray of Sarah's special soup, the crash echoing through the restaurant like a gunshot. The silence that followed was deafening. Mason rushed to help clean up, but Christian waved him away, struggling to his knees despite the pain to clean the mess himself. "I'm supposed to be the strong one," he said later that night, his voice breaking as Lauren helped him with his therapy exercises. "How can I protect anyone when I can barely protect myself?" The medical bills mounted alongside the restaurant's other financial troubles. Christian insisted on continuing to work despite the doctor's orders, each shift a testament to his stubbornness and devotion to the family he'd found at the Heritage Kitchen. Mason began studying physical therapy techniques, spending his free time learning exercises that might help Christian. The boy who had once needed protection now became a protector himself, though the role reversal weighed heavily on both of them. The community watched as one of their strongest defenders struggled with this invisible battle. Regular customers learned to wait patiently as Christian moved more slowly between tables, their loyalty unwavering even as service times increased. Yet through it all, Christian refused to break. Each morning he would arrive early to practice his movements, each day a new battle against pain and limitation. The warrior spirit that had once expressed itself in martial arts now showed in his simple refusal to give up. Sometimes he told Mason during one particularly difficult day, strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about continuing even when you're broken. The words seemed to echo Sarah's wisdom about resilience and love being stronger than any hardship. But as the days wore on, it became increasingly clear that Christian's injury, like Jonathan's illness and the restaurant's financial troubles, was another crack in the foundation of the family they had built. Each struggle seemed to compound the others, threatening to collapse the delicate balance they had maintained. Lauren's revelation of her identity as Jonathan's sister came at a crucial moment during what seemed to be Jonathan's darkest hour. As he lay in his hospital bed, growing weaker by the day, she finally pieced together the last fragments of their shared past from Sarah's recipe book. The breakthrough came through a series of birthdays marked in the margins of specific recipes. Each date corresponded to a significant moment in Lauren's early life: her first steps, her first words, the last day Sarah had seen her. The recipes themselves told a story: comfort foods made during custody battles, celebration cakes never served, holiday dishes prepared for family gatherings that remained incomplete. "I wasn't abandoned," Lauren whispered, tears falling onto the worn pages. "I was taken." She traced her mother's handwriting, seeing now how Sarah had encoded messages of love into every recipe, hoping someday her daughter would return to decode them. When she rushed to Jonathan's hospital room that evening, she found him barely conscious, with Mason keeping his usual vigil. The recipe book trembled in her hands as she approached the bed. "Jonathan," she said softly, "I know who I am. I know who we are." Jonathan's eyes flickered open, focusing slowly on her face. "You have her eyes," he murmured. "I always thought." But I couldn't be sure. He reached for her hand with what little strength he had left. "Oh, little sister, Mom never stopped looking for you." Mason watched in amazement as the pieces fell into place, the natural connection they'd all felt, the way Lauren had been drawn to protect the restaurant, how she seemed to know instinctively where everything belonged in Sarah's kitchen. The colonel, who had been dozing in a corner chair, awoke to witness this reunion. His military training couldn't prevent the tears that formed as he watched another family heal, even as his grandson's adoptive father lay dying. Christian arrived shortly after, having closed the restaurant early. He found Lauren curled up beside Jonathan's bed, both siblings poring over the recipe book together. Jonathan was pointing out special notes Sarah had made about Lauren, her favorite foods, her allergies, the special way she used to dance while Sarah cooked. "She made this cake," Jonathan explained, his voice stronger than it had been in days, "every year on your birthday, even after she got sick. She said we had to be ready in case you came home." The recipe was stained with what looked like teardrops from years past. Lauren discovered that her earliest memory, the warm kitchen filled with the smell of baking bread and the sound of a woman's soft singing, wasn't a dream at all. It was Sarah, their mother, preparing her special recipe while holding her daughter close. "I remember the lullaby," Lauren said suddenly, starting to hum a familiar tune. Jonathan's eyes widened as he joined in. It was the same melody Sarah had sung in the kitchen every day, a song of love and hope for her lost daughter. The revelation seemed to breathe new life into Jonathan. He began sharing stories about their childhood, about the day Lauren was taken, about Sarah's relentless efforts to find her. Each memory was tied to a recipe: the cookies she'd packed for Lauren's first day of preschool, the soup she made when Lauren had a cold, the special birthday cake that was their last meal together as a complete family. Mason, listening intently, recognized the patterns in Sarah's cooking, the way she used food to heal, to remember, to keep love alive. It was the same way Jonathan had taught him, the same legacy he was now carrying forward. Christian watched Lauren absorb each revelation, seeing her professional facade crumble as she reclaimed her true identity. The strong, independent investigator allowed herself to be vulnerable, to be part of something bigger than herself, to be Sarah Walker's daughter again. The nurses who came to check on Jonathan found themselves working around this impromptu family reunion. Something had changed in the room. There was an energy, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Jonathan's vital signs, which had been weakening, showed unexpected improvement. The recipe book became their guide through the past, each page revealing another piece of their shared history. Lauren discovered notes about her favorite colors, her first words, the way she used to help Sarah in the kitchen, even as a toddler. Sarah had documented everything, preserving these memories like precious ingredients in her recipes. But she never lost hope, Jonathan said, holding his sister's hand. Even at the end, she believed you'd find your way back to us, he smiled weakly. And you did. You found our kitchen, just like she said you would. The Heritage Kitchen had drawn Lauren back home, just as it had drawn Mason to safety, just as it had given Christian a new purpose. Sarah's legacy of love, encoded in recipes and seasoned with hope, had finally brought her children back together. As the night deepened, Lauren began to hum their mother's lullaby again. The simple melody filled the hospital room, carrying with it decades of love, loss, and finally reunion. Jonathan closed his eyes, peaceful for the first time in weeks, knowing that their family was whole again. Mason looked at his father's dog tags, then at Lauren and Jonathan, understanding now that family could be lost and found, broken and mended, separated and reunited. The Heritage Kitchen had been more than just a restaurant. It had been Sarah's way of keeping her family together, even when they were apart. The truth about Logan's involvement in their mother's death emerged through Martha's final confession. She arrived at the hospital late one night, carrying a thick file of documents and a burden of guilt she'd carried for years. Her hands trembled as she handed the file to Lauren, unable to meet Jonathan's eyes from his hospital bed. Sarah didn't just die from cancer, Martha began, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan. He knew about an experimental treatment that could have saved her. He had the information, the connections to get her into the trial program, but he buried it. The documentation was damning. Emails, medical records, and private correspondence revealed how Logan had intercepted information about the treatment, fearing that if Sarah recovered, she would demand repayment of his loan. He had systematically blocked every avenue of help, ensuring that Sarah's condition would deteriorate beyond the point of intervention. Jonathan's reaction was devastating to watch. His already weakened body seemed to collapse in on itself as he learned the full extent of his former friend's betrayal. She could have lived, he whispered, the words falling like stones in the quiet room. She could have met Mason, seen Lauren come home. Mason, who had been heating Sarah's healing soup in a thermos, dropped it upon hearing the news. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the hospital room like a gunshot. The soup, Sarah's recipe for healing, spread across the floor, a painful symbol of what Logan had destroyed. Lauren, her investigator's composure cracking, read through the documents with shaking hands. There were records of Logan's deliberate manipulation of Sarah's medical insurance, his interference with her doctors, his careful orchestration of her decline. Each page revealed a new layer of calculated cruelty. Christian, still moving carefully due to his injuries, gathered Mason into his arms as the boy broke down. She could have been here, Mason sobbed. She could have taught me herself. She could have seen me become a chef. The colonel, who had been standing guard by the door, moved to examine the documents with his military precision. This isn't just unethical, he stated grimly. This is criminal negligence, possibly manslaughter. He killed her as surely as if he'd used a weapon. Martha continued her confession, revealing how Logan had celebrated when news of Sarah's death reached him. He said it was convenient timing. Those were his exact words. He was already planning to take over the restaurant even before she was gone. More devastating details emerged. Logan had been present at the hospital during Sarah's final days, playing the role of concerned friend while actively preventing information about the treatment from reaching Jonathan. He had even consoled Jonathan at the funeral, all while knowing his own role in Sarah's death. The recipe book, lying open on Jonathan's bedside table, seemed to take on new meaning. Sarah's careful documentation of each recipe, her notes about healing and hope, had been her way of fighting against the darkness Logan had created around her. Even as he worked to destroy her, she had continued to create, to nurture, to love. Lauren discovered entries in Sarah's personal diary, hidden within the recipe book's pages, that showed she had suspected something was wrong. "Someone is blocking my calls to the research hospital," one entry read. Logan offers to help, but things only get worse. "Still, I must believe in the good in people. That's what I've always taught my children." The truth sparked a fire in Jonathan that seemed to temporarily overcome his illness. "She never lost faith in people," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Even when she knew something was wrong, she kept trying to help others. That was her real legacy." Mason, wiping his tears, stood straighter. "Then we have to do the same," he declared. "We have to make sure everyone knows the truth, but we also have to keep her spirit of kindness alive. That's how we truly honor her." Martha provided one final piece of evidence, a recording of Logan bragging about his manipulation of Sarah's situation to potential investors. The old lady was too trusting for her own good, his voice sneered from the device. Sometimes kindness is just weakness waiting to be exploited. The revelation of Logan's true nature brought a strange kind of peace to the hospital room. The monster they had been fighting had finally shown his full face, and in doing so had revealed the true strength of Sarah's legacy. Her kindness hadn't been weakness, it had been a form of courage that Logan could never understand. Lauren gathered the evidence carefully, her hands steady now with purpose. Mom's recipes were about healing, about bringing people together, she said. Logan tried to use that against her, but in the end it's what will bring him down. The truth always rises, just like her bread. The night ended with an unlikely moment of healing. Mason, determined to counteract the spilled soup, began preparing a fresh batch of Sarah's recipe in the hospital room's small microwave. The familiar smell filled the space, pushing back against the sterile hospital air, against the weight of Logan's betrayal, against the grief of what might have been. As they shared the soup, Jonathan taking small, careful sips, Lauren and Christian holding hands, the Colonel standing guard, and Mason watching them all with fierce love, they understood that Sarah's real victory wasn't in surviving, but in creating a family that would carry on her legacy of love and healing, even in the face of ultimate betrayal. The discovery of a hidden cure in Sarah's recipe came through an unlikely source, the complex coded messages woven throughout her recipe book. Late one night, as Mason prepared another batch of healing soup for Jonathan, Lauren noticed something peculiar in her mother's notations. These aren't just measurements, she realized, comparing different versions of the same recipe across years. They're chemical compounds her investigators' training kicked in as she began to decode the careful annotations Sarah had made in the margins. The Colonel, with his military background in biochemistry, a fact he'd never mentioned before, recognized the pattern immediately. These combinations, they're similar to experimental cancer treatments I encountered during my service. Your mother was a brilliant woman. Hidden within Sarah's most powerful healing recipes was a natural treatment protocol she had been developing before her death. Each ingredient had been carefully chosen not just for its culinary properties, but for its medicinal value. The proportions, the cooking methods, even the serving temperatures were precisely calculated for maximum therapeutic effect. Mom was working with a research hospital, Jonathan revealed weakly from his bed. She never told anyone because she didn't want to give false hope, but she was close to something the pharmaceutical companies couldn't patent because it used only natural ingredients. Mason's hands trembled as he realized he'd been unknowingly preparing elements of this treatment every time he made Sarah's special recipes. The healing soup, the restorative teas, the specific combinations of herbs and spices, they weren't just comfort food, they were medicine. Lauren worked through the night with the Colonel, decoding Sarah's notes. Martha, still making amends for her role in Logan's schemes, brought research files she'd secretly saved from the hospital where Sarah had been treated. The pieces began falling into place. This is why Logan interfered with her treatment, Christian said, understanding dawning in his eyes. He didn't just want to avoid repaying the loan, He was protecting his investments in pharmaceutical companies that would have lost millions if Sarah's natural protocols became known. The decoded recipes revealed a comprehensive treatment approach that combined traditional healing wisdom with modern medical understanding. Sarah had documented everything meticulously, case studies disguised as customer testimonials, treatment responses hidden in recipe reviews. Mason, with his intimate knowledge of Sarah's cooking techniques, became crucial to implementing the protocol. The timing has to be exact, he explained, preparing the components with surgical precision. Just like Mrs. Sarah always taught me, every step matters, every ingredient has its moment. The hospital's oncology team was skeptical at first, but the Colonel's military credentials and Lauren's methodical evidence presentation convinced them to try. Jonathan began receiving Sarah's protocol alongside his conventional treatment, each dish prepared exactly according to his mother's hidden instructions. Gradually, impossibly, Jonathan began to improve. His blood work showed changes that amazed his doctors. The aggressive cancer that had been winning began to retreat. Sarah's final gift to her son, hidden in plain sight among her recipes, was fighting for his life. The discovery spread hope throughout the Heritage Kitchen's extended family. Regular customers who had been facing their own health battles began requesting specific dishes, not knowing they were receiving carefully calibrated natural medicines along with their meals. Lauren found herself crying over the recipe book, understanding now why her mother had been so precise, so insistent on exact measurements and methods. She wasn't just teaching us to cook, she told Mason. She was teaching us to heal. The Colonel helped document everything properly this time, ensuring Sarah's work would be validated by the medical community. His military connections proved invaluable in navigating the complex world of medical research and clinical trials. Christian, despite his own injuries, took on the task of organizing the kitchen to properly prepare these healing meals. Each dish required perfect timing, specific temperatures, exact proportions. It was like conducting a symphony of healing, with Mason as the lead virtuoso. The most powerful moment came when they found Sarah's final note, hidden in the binding of the recipe book. To my children. It read, "I leave you not just recipes, but hope. In these pages is everything I learned about healing body and soul. Trust in the wisdom of nature, in the power of love, and in the strength of family. Some ingredients can't be measured, but they're the most important ones." As Jonathan's condition improved, the true scope of Sarah's legacy became clear. She hadn't just created recipes, she had developed a revolutionary healing protocol disguised as a collection of comfort food. Her kitchen hadn't just been a restaurant, it had been a research laboratory of love and natural medicine. The Heritage Kitchen took on a new dimension, becoming a place where traditional wisdom and modern medicine worked together. Sarah's recipes, finally understood in their full complexity, began helping others just as she had always intended. Mason, now understanding the true importance of precision in his cooking, approached each dish with renewed purpose. He wasn't just preparing food, he was continuing Sarah's work, helping to heal their community one carefully crafted meal at a time. The recipe book was no longer just a family heirloom, it was a medical breakthrough, a testament to one woman's determination to help others, and proof that sometimes the most powerful medicines come from the most ordinary places: a mother's kitchen, her love for her children, and her hope for a healthier world. Jonathan's recovery transformed the Heritage Kitchen into a symbol of hope and healing. 6 months after implementing Sarah's hidden protocols, he stood in the kitchen again, watching Mason prepare the morning's first batch of bread. The familiar scent of yeast and love filled the air, but now they understood the deeper healing properties behind every recipe. The restaurant had become something entirely new, a unique blend of traditional comfort food and natural healing. People came from across the country seeking not just meals but hope. Sarah's carefully coded recipes, now properly documented and validated by medical research, were helping others fight their own battles against illness. Lauren had quit her job as a health inspector to manage the new healing program full-time. Working alongside the colonel, she coordinated with medical professionals to ensure each patient received the exact combinations Sarah had prescribed. Her mother's recipe book had become a manual for a revolutionary approach to healing. Christian's injuries had also improved through Sarah's protocols. Though he would never regain his full martial arts abilities, he found a new purpose training others in adaptive self-defense, showing them how to work with their limitations rather than against them. The restaurant's back room became a space for both physical and emotional healing. Mason, now 17, had grown into his role as head chef with remarkable grace. He prepared each therapeutic dish with the precision of a scientist and the love of a grandson honoring his grandmother's legacy. Under his guidance, the kitchen staff learned to view cooking as both an art and a healing practice. Mrs. Sarah knew Mason would say as he trained new cooks. She knew that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about love, attention, and the belief that every ingredient has a purpose. His dedication to maintaining her exact standards had made him one of the most respected therapeutic chefs in the country. The colonel's military connections had helped establish a research foundation in Sarah's name. The Sarah Walker Foundation for Natural Healing worked to bridge the gap between traditional wisdom and modern medicine, funding studies that validated what Sarah had discovered through years of careful observation and love. Regular customers still came for their favorite comfort foods, but now they understood why certain dishes had always made them feel better. Mrs. Rodriguez's arthritis improved with Sarah's special soup. The veterans who gathered for weekly dinners found their PTSD symptoms easing after meals prepared according to specific recipes. Jonathan, fully recovered, took on a new role as the restaurant's heart. He shared stories of Sarah's wisdom, helped coordinate the healing program, and ensured that every person who walked through their doors felt the same love and acceptance his mother had always offered. The community that had rallied to save the Heritage Kitchen now worked together to expand its mission. Local farmers provided organic ingredients grown to Sarah's specifications. Medical professionals collaborated with the kitchen staff to track results, but other restaurants began requesting training in therapeutic cooking techniques. Lauren found herself growing closer to her rediscovered family with each passing day. The hole in her heart that she'd never understood was finally filled. She and Christian married in the restaurant's dining room, with Mason serving a wedding feast prepared entirely from Sarah's most joy-filled recipes. The Heritage Kitchen's reputation grew, but they maintained their commitment to serving everyone, regardless of ability to pay. Just as Sarah had done, they kept aside portions for those in need, believing that healing should never be denied due to financial circumstances. The restaurant's walls now displayed not just family photos but documented success stories, X-rays showing unexpected recoveries, letters from grateful patients, scientific papers validating Sarah's methods. Yet among these achievements, Sarah's original portrait remained central, her gentle smile watching over the legacy she'd created. Most importantly, the spirit of love and acceptance that Sarah had instilled continued to grow. The Heritage Kitchen became more than a restaurant, more than a healing center. It became a model for how communities could care for each other, how traditional wisdom could complement modern medicine, how love could be both the first ingredient and the final healing touch. As Jonathan watched Mason teach a new generation of therapeutic chefs, he felt his mother's presence strongly. She knew. He thought, she knew that someday we'd understand that her kitchen was never just about food. It was about healing hearts, rebuilding lives, and proving that love is the most powerful medicine of all. Logan's arrest and justice being served came with unexpected moments of redemption. The trial revealed not just his crimes against Sarah and the Heritage Kitchen, but a lifetime of manipulation and betrayal that had hurt countless families across the city. In the courtroom, Martha's testimony proved devastating. She detailed years of watching Logan destroy small businesses, manipulate medical records, and profit from others' suffering. But it was the evidence about Sarah's death that finally broke through his composed facade. As Lauren presented Sarah's last letter to Logan, the one expressing hope that he would find his way back to kindness, something shifted in his eyes. For a moment, the arrogant businessman vanished, replaced by the hungry young man Sarah had once fed and encouraged. The community turned out in force to support the prosecution. One by one, people stood to share their stories: families who had lost businesses to Logan's schemes, patients who had been denied treatment due to his interference, lives that had been damaged by his greed. Jonathan, now recovered enough to attend, faced his former friend from the witness stand. "My mother believed in you," he said, his voice strong and clear. "She saw good in you when no one else did, and even now I think that good is still there, buried under years of bitterness and greed." The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed the systematic destruction of small businesses. Medical files proved his interference in Sarah's treatment. Security footage captured his orchestrated attacks on the Heritage Kitchen. Each piece of evidence stripped away another layer of Logan's carefully constructed facade. Mason's testimony about the night of the fire particularly affected the jury. His description of trying to save Sarah's recipe book while Logan's men tried to burn down his only chance at a family moved several jurors to tears. The boy's resilience, contrasted with Logan's cruelty, painted a stark picture of the choice between love and greed. The colonel's military contacts had uncovered even more offshore accounts, shell companies, a network of corruption that stretched back decades. But it was the small betrayals that seemed to affect Logan most: the daily kindnesses from Sarah that he had repaid with calculated cruelty. Christian and Lauren presented evidence about the attack that had left him injured, revealing how Logan had specifically targeted those who showed the same kindness Sarah had once shown him. The pattern was clear: he had tried to destroy not just businesses, but the very spirit of community that Sarah had fostered. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. Logan faced years in prison and massive financial restitution. But it was his final statement to the court that surprised everyone. "Sarah was right," he said, his voice breaking. "She always said that bitterness was a poison you serve yourself. I've been drinking it for years." The Heritage Kitchen community showed Sarah's spirit even in victory. Rather than celebrating Logan's downfall, they focused on healing the damage he had caused. The restaurant established a fund to help other small businesses recover from similar predatory practices. Jonathan, embodying his mother's belief in redemption, made sure that Logan received meals in prison prepared according to Sarah's recipes. "Mom would want us to remember that healing isn't just for the body," he explained. "It's for the soul, too." The restitution payments were channeled into expanding the Heritage Kitchen's mission. New locations opened, each dedicated to combining Sarah's healing recipes with her philosophy of community service. Her legacy of love began to replace Logan's legacy of destruction. Martha, freed from her years of complicity, became an advocate for corporate accountability. She worked with Lauren to establish guidelines preventing similar exploitation, ensuring that Sarah's story would help protect other small businesses from predatory practices. The final piece of justice came when Logan's former properties were converted into community spaces, affordable housing, small business incubators, and healing centers, all operating on Sarah's principles of kindness and mutual support. The empire built on greed was transformed into a network of hope. As the community healed from Logan's betrayals, they discovered that Sarah had been right all along. The antidote to greed and bitterness was not revenge, but love. The Heritage Kitchen stood as living proof that kindness, even in the face of cruelty, could ultimately triumph. The Heritage Kitchen's final evolution into a cultural heritage site came with a deep understanding of Sarah's true legacy. 1 year after Jonathan's recovery and Logan's conviction, the restaurant had become more than just a place of healing. It was a living monument to the power of love, family, and community. The official dedication ceremony brought together everyone who had been touched by Sarah's vision. Mason, now a certified therapeutic chef, prepared a feast using all of her signature recipes. Each dish carried not just healing properties, but memories of how her kitchen had changed countless lives. Jonathan stood proudly beside Lauren as they unveiled the bronze plaque, declaring the Heritage Kitchen a protected historical landmark. "Our mother," Lauren announced, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd, didn't just build a restaurant, she created a template for how communities can heal themselves. Christian, moving with renewed strength thanks to Sarah's protocols, had expanded the restaurant's mission to include a training center for other trauma survivors. His adaptive martial arts program, combined with therapeutic cooking classes, helped others find the same healing he had discovered. The Colonel, who had become a beloved grandfather figure to all, established a scholarship fund in Thomas's name. It supported young people who wanted to study both culinary arts and healing sciences, ensuring that Sarah's integrated approach to wellness would continue through future generations. Mason's Culinary School for Underprivileged Youth became a model program, teaching not just cooking skills but the deeper wisdom Sarah had encoded in her recipes. Every dish tells a story he would tell his students, and every story has the power to heal. The restaurant's expanded community kitchen now served thousands of meals weekly to those in need, each one prepared according to Sarah's healing principles. The dining room remained open to all, maintaining her belief that good food and loving community should be available to everyone. Lauren and Christian's marriage had blessed them with twins, whom they named Sarah and Thomas. The babies spent their days in the restaurant, surrounded by the extended family that the Heritage Kitchen had created, already absorbing the legacy of love that would be their inheritance. Jonathan, fully recovered and radiating his mother's gentle strength, became a sought-after speaker on integrative healing. He shared Sarah's story and wisdom while ensuring that the Heritage Kitchen remained true to its roots as a place where anyone could find nourishment for body and soul. The recipe book, now professionally preserved and studied by medical researchers, continued to yield new insights. Sarah's brilliant combination of traditional wisdom and innovative healing protocols revolutionized approaches to therapeutic nutrition. Yet its greatest lessons remained the simplest: that love is the most powerful medicine, and family can be found in unexpected places. Regular customers became part of an extended family, each with their own story of healing and hope. The walls of the restaurant displayed not just Sarah's portrait, but a growing collection of photographs documenting the lives touched and transformed by her legacy. The Heritage Kitchen's influence spread far beyond its walls. Other restaurants began adopting its model of combining community service with therapeutic cooking. Medical centers incorporated Sarah's protocols into their treatment programs. Social service agencies studied its approach to building community through shared meals and shared purpose. Mason's own children would someday learn their great-grandmother's recipes, ensuring that Sarah's wisdom would continue for generations. The kitchen remained a place of constant learning and discovery, where science and love worked together to create something greater than either could achieve alone. The restaurant's garden, once a small herb patch, had grown into a healing garden that supplied ingredients for Sarah's therapeutic recipes. It became a peaceful retreat where visitors could experience the healing power of nature that Sarah had understood so well. On quiet evenings, when the dining room hummed with conversation and the kitchen filled with familiar aromas, Sarah's presence could still be felt. Her spirit lived on in every meal served, every life touched, every broken heart that found healing within these walls. The Heritage Kitchen stood as proof that one person's love could create ripples of healing that continued long after they were gone. Sarah's legacy wasn't just in the recipes she left behind, but in the way she taught others to nourish both body and soul, to believe in the healing power of community, and to trust that love could transform lives. In the end, the Heritage Kitchen became exactly what Sarah had always intended: not just a restaurant, but a beacon of hope, a place of healing, and a testament to the enduring power of love served daily, one meal at a time. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of healing, love, and redemption. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences and reflections mean the world to us. Support our team by subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with friends and family who might find comfort in Sarah's story. Every like helps us continue creating meaningful content that celebrates the triumph of the human spirit. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories of hope and resilience. Together we can spread Sarah's message of love and healing.